Hi, I'm Wayne Tuttle, and this is Chasing Legends. Welcome back, Chasing Legends. I'm Wayne Tuttle, your host once again. So here we go. Please hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, leave a comment, check out our website, www.legendofsuperstitionmountains.com. There was a bit of trouble with the hats and the shirts and the coffee cups and some things with the different organizations we were using. Trevor's getting to that. We should have everything satisfied and up and running this summer and back to normal, even if we have to work and use another vendor. That being said and done, let's move forward. This story is a story of a place that's very familiar to a number of people. Some people, it might have been the first time they've heard of it. It's called Tumacacori. It's a mission between Tucson and Nogales. It's pretty well known about a treasure story at the treasure of Tumacacori and the mines in the area. And I have a file, probably this thick, that covers a bunch of different stories and variations on stories. And I read through it and I was trying to figure out a way to put this story together. And then I ran across several articles, and it's basically two articles, and I think they sum up the story the best way for our program necessarily. Because there's a lot of almost urban myth legend stories in this, which I'll cover a bit of something here to explain that. So it's around 1889, and a gentleman named Judge William Henry Barnes. He's a territorial judge, been appointed in the territory of Arizona. He's working out of Tucson. And in his office, as a gentleman comes, he's a priest from Spain, and he's come that he's looking to acquire some church documents, Jesuit documents, it appears. And he speaks with Barnes. Barnes needs a translator to talk to him. They go back and forth for a while. The gentleman has a manuscript called the Direttore de Tumacacori, and he's going through it. Barnes admits he has very remedial Spanish. He doesn't really speak Spanish. He doesn't read Spanish. But this gentleman has this and says he can probably take them out. He needs some people to guide him and get him out to the spot. So Barnes, thinking this has to do with treasure, because there have been treasure stories about Tumacacori, gets several ranchers he knows, and they get together, and they go out with this priest, and they go looking. Lo and behold, he actually doesn't have that much trouble and finds this spot. And they acquire this chest, a box or chest, and it's full of papers and records. When they get the chest, he opens it, he goes through, checks to make sure the records and papers are there. They bring it back into town where he does a full inventory of it. He thanks Barnes and the guys that assisted him very, very much for helping him find this. They're kind of thrown off because they thought this could be a treasure hunt or there would be something more to it. Turns out the priest only cared about the documents in this chest. But before he leaves, he turns to Barnes and says, as far as the Direttore de Tumacacori, mouthful there, he gives that to Barnes and says, hey, you can find someone to translate. We have no need for it anymore. This is a copy of it. Do with it what you will. And the priest leaves. Well, Barnes goes through it and tries to figure, and he says, I can't get up or down. So he goes around the area of Tucson, and he finds several scholars, and he gives each one a copy of this manuscript. And each one does their translation, and Barnes gets it back, and it seems to be three different versions of the same story. There's similarities, but they also all differ in a lot of ways. So Barnes and a group of different people several times go looking for it. Now, Barnes dies in 1903, and he said the story is what it was, but he could never make heads or tails of it. And even the instructions and everything that he was able to get through the translations was very, very vague. So he never got anywhere with any of it. Said he believed there was something there. It led to either treasure or caches of silver and gold or possibly mines. Well, these translators each made copies and shared with family members and others, and colleagues and so forth. And so these three variations of the translation get out there in the public. And they're actually, you can, if you look hard enough, you can find each one. And they are different interpretations, very quite different from each other. Well, nothing comes of all of this until a gentleman by the name, and I'm going to get his name right here because it's a simple name. His name is Michael Ford, and he's a California educator. He's doing a sabbatical. He's down in Tucson, and during the sabbatical, he's going through Southwest Jesuit and church records and stuff. And he gets a hold of a book, and he's going through this book, and he finds these old papers, and he realizes they're quite old, and he's going through it, and it turns out it's one of the translations of the Desatero de Tumacacori. Starts reading it and the translation of it, and he finds it a bit confusing because it's supposedly, once he inquires to people, it's about a Jesuit mission and a Jesuit treasure, but the dates in the manuscript go from 1548 to 1648. And the problem is that the Jesuits don't arrive and come into that period. So he's thinking this has to do with Franciscans or something, and the conquistadors and much earlier. And so he's going through it, and then he decides, well, before I go any further, and he does have interest in this from a historical, scholarly look, he decides to get copies of the other translations. So he has to look for a while, but then he gets what he believes are the three original translations, the one he has, and then two others that vary from each other. And he said the one thing he noticed about them is the two were a bit similar to some degree, and there were things that they had in common, but the one he had seen the first time was actually quite different. It actually was more bare bones. There was less things added to it. And one of the things he noted was, in the two other translations, it was the mission, or Tumacacori mission. In the one he had, it just called it a place name, Tumacacori. So he found this interesting, thinking, well, this must be something of the problem. It was a place name or an area name, and maybe the others embellished the story, felt like, well, they must mean the mission, and added the word mission to it. So since he didn't have the original, he was kind of looking at it and kind of thinking, well, I'll just continue my research. He wasn't a treasure hunter necessarily. But as he's doing research and stuff, he comes upon, it's a journal by a gentleman named Ramon Martinez, who went on an expedition through Arizona in 1596. During this expedition, Martinez talks about the conquistadors come through and they stop at a place where there's a priest in a small chapel, not a mission. It's a Franciscan priest, and they do mass. And this is kind of absolve them of their sins for their whatever their little thing, conquests and what they did and all. But as they do this, he talks about the place is called Tumacacori. Now, Michael Ford talked to a number of people and said, I believe this is a place name or about the Indians, which Tumacacori in Arizona is generally literally about the place of the Chili's and so forth. And there was a group of Indians referred to from that area as the Tumacacori. He felt that this document had to do with an earlier group of Franciscans, which is very interesting, rather than later the Jesuits, him pointing that by the time the document, if you take the document's dates and records together, Kino came in after all this had pretty much long been done and said. Now, maybe the Jesuits had some knowledge of it, but it was the Franciscan order that would have been here during that time period. So Ford puts all this together, but you know how treasure hunters can be. They're poo-pawing this stuff because everybody became all Kino Jesuits. And Ford's work and a lot of what he was doing was kind of pushed aside. And I was kind of surprised because I went through, there was probably about 20 to 25 different articles and stories. And Michael Ford's research and stuff doesn't seem to appear in most of them. And I thought what he had to say was very interesting. He has a translation, one of the three translations, which I looked up, and I thought, yes, it is there. There's things missing out of it, which meant to me, similar to anything, is people embellished the storytelling or writing or assumed certain things. So one of the things Ford discovers is it talks about 6 different mines in the area. And one of them is the Apache. There's another one, it's the Virgin of Guadalupe, the Purity of Concepcion, and then the Tumacacori mine. And he has these 6 mines, and there's actually waybills of what either came from them or was stored in them at the given time when this was made. So who knows if the silver and gold one has like over 2,000 bars of silver, another one has several carts of slabs of silver that are stored there, or perhaps came from that mine. But what he finds very interesting, and Ford, remember, doesn't know the barn story or anything entirely, he finds that it says in there that if you need to find the mines and the stuff, even though it gives them general directions, this mine is 2 leagues from this mine. This mine is southeast by a league this way. It states in there that if you go a league north of the Onate, you're going to find the Tumacacori mine. When you find it, there's a box buried there nearby. And when you find that box and you find it, there's a screw in the back. And if you take the screw out, it'll release an iron bar. When you pull that iron bar, there's a compartment, and in that compartment is all the maps to all the mines in the area. So all the mines and the waybills and stuff for that stuff specifically is located in this wooden box. Ford, not knowing the entirety of the history, because he was more interested in what he was specifically, he wasn't a treasure hunter. That was about the end of that, and I didn't find much else about Michael Ford or anything he'd written. I would like to find something because it sounds very interesting. But this leads us to understand of the priest that comes from Spain is very interested in this wooden box. Was this wooden box the very box that's talked about? That's by the Tumacacori mine. And did he take the box back, realizing this other piece of paper means nothing? He gives you a very general direction, but he actually took the box with the church records, which is what they probably really wanted, unknowing perhaps that even still, or maybe he did know, the maps and the other information that was most important was in the box, and they were able to leave with it. So we have the 3 translations. Those are publicly known. You can find reference material and stuff on it. What brings us around, and of course we talk generally about superstitions and the Lost Dutchman Mine and stuff, is there's a gentleman named Milton Rose. Milton Rose was around for quite a number of years. Quite a few older Dutch hunters met Milton. He liked to talk about the Dutchmen. He wrote a manuscript called Rainbow's End. He wrote a lot of magazine articles. One of his magazine articles is finding this mine tunnel. And this gives us an example of what people would write about as far as Tumacacori and so forth. Supposedly him and a man named John, sometime in the 20s or 30s, they find this old mine and they start trying to clean it out. It's just a hole, but they start cleaning out the opening, and they get in, they find a bunch of old silver bars in the dirt and muck in there. So they're going through it, realize it had collapsed, but it's infested with rattlesnakes. And his story starts to become one part Raiders of the Lost Ark and one part almost Victorio Peak, because they're going in and they're pulling out all these silver bars and gold and different stuff. And he has magazine articles, he shows pictures, which I'll come to in a second. But the problem is they start to kill the infestation of rattlesnakes over a period of time as they come and go. They kill like 20 or 30, then they kill 40 or 50, and then they kill 100. They keep going back with gasoline. It becomes very Raiders of the Lost Ark, where they're spraying gas and lighting them on fire and doing all this crazy stuff. And they're letting it literally burn overnight and then get some more stuff out. At one point it talks they killed 50 to 100 rattlesnakes, and they had to pull the carcasses of the rattlesnakes out to clear away. I don't know how many rattlesnakes you would think the snakes would leave eventually, with them continually to firebomb. They even dynamited and firebombed part of this place. Supposedly they pulled out somewhere, anywhere, depending on Milton's suggestions, 200 to 300 to 1,000 silver bars out of this mine. They drug them down to the truck. They even bought a new truck so they could do double loads of the silver bars because it was weighing down the truck so much. I'm not sure how much I buy into this story. Milton Rose was a bit different. His Dutchman story is that Jacob Waltz, his name was actually Ballweiser. It was not Julia Thomas and Reinhard Petrasch. It wasn't Dick Holmes. It was a Mexican named Ramirez. And he got kind of out there with some of his stories. He seemed to be more of a fantasy writer at times. I've read lots of letters he wrote to people. He usually did 2 things in those letters. He denounced anyone else who wrote about the Dutchman and had anything to say about it to the people he was talking to. And secondly, he liked to pump himself up, that he was the expert and he knew everything. The last thing I will add is Milton Rose also, and if you've read a couple of these other books, you'll find his name pops in there. He also claimed, and he himself said it, he claimed to have killed Adolph Ruth. Said it was he himself that actually did the job. I'm not sure about any of that. I don't know what he was like. I know a number of people that met him. They seem to like him, thought he was an excellent researcher, but more and more whenever I get into Milton Rose's research, I kind of find it almost, I'm getting into fantasy, which is very similar to Ted Cox and certain other people. It's like suddenly things don't start tying in at all, and they almost are doing such a unique, completely different story that you're like, why would have no one else even touched upon this? Jacob Waltz's real name was Ballweiser. Everybody in town knew it, but nobody seen it. He signed all his documents Waltz, and nobody cared. It's very, very odd. So Milton Rose, you can look him up. There's a number of articles out in treasure magazines in the 60s and the 70s that he wrote, I think into the early 80s. And while he didn't publish anything, didn't publish his manuscript, Rainbow's End, it was available through the Superstition Mountain Museum for a number of years. And maybe that's one we'll get up on the website eventually, just so people can read through that. And his, I don't know how accurate you could ever say it is, but it's unique to itself. So there you go. There's the treasure story of Tumacacori. If you do find one of these translations, find all three. Put them together. Find the one that seems most lean. And if you can locate that one silver mine, you can find north of there within 1 league, because the measurements in it say that they're all in varas and leagues. And if you're able to locate the Tumacacori mine, place name, not necessarily the mission, there you go. This is not to leave out the next story we'll tell eventually, is the bells of Tumacacori, which are supposedly buried somewhere on site, but I didn't locate those, and I don't know of anyone that's ever located the bells out there. Perhaps they have been located, but maybe that's a story for another day. So I hope you enjoyed today's story. I always try to put something out there. Go visit that area, Tubac. I think it's Tubac Jack's is a barbecue place down there that has some really great food in Tubac. Then go down to Tumacacori. San Xavier de Bac is down there. So there's so much to see in that area. But there is a trail that will take you down to the Santa Cruz River in that area. And they do talk about the missions in certain areas that were settled. If you got a little extra time, start driving around and look up on the ridges and stuff and see if you see any sign of any of those lost mines of the Tumacacori. So there you go. Hope everybody enjoyed that. Hope everybody's having a wonderful weekend and they're getting into the work week safely. Can't wait to see everybody Friday on the live. We've been having some really good talks, so join us on Friday at Arizona time, 4 p.m. or just jump back over and catch it. It's a little all over the place this year. This week there was no hockey. And we actually did talk treasure hunting. So there you go. You never know what's going to come week to week. So there you go. Thank you for joining us. But remember, the most important thing you leave here with today or tonight or tomorrow is that I'm Wayne Tuttle. You're not. And this was Chasing Legends.